Diesel Den. Brought to you by HoneyBadgerMotorsports.
All right, today, topic of the day is the 6.7 Powerstroke and everything you would and not want to know.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
Alrighty. Do you want some trivia on Powerstrokes?
Go ahead. Let's see what I can pull off.
Oh, well, I wasn't really basically a question. I guess trivia is the wrong word, but
Question me. What's the answers?
Well, I want your opinion. What is the most or the least known thing about the 6.7 Powerstroke that's arguably also still important?
The least known.
Yeah. Like what is I wouldn't say misconception. We just talked about it. But what is something that you see with people who talk about the 6.7s and stuff like that that kind of goes missed a bunch? Do you have anything in your head? Because everybody knows CP4. Everybody knows CP4 failures.
No, I think there's not enough posts on DCRs.
Oh my god, I know. What are other things that people need to be paying attention to on these trucks?
You're going to throw me for a loop.
Well, let's talk about the 11 and 12s. Let's talk about it. You know, everybody talks about 15 up turbos. Nobody talks about 11 and 12 valve issues, I feel like. Everybody focuses on CP4.
Yeah. So, 11 models. Yeah. I own one. Yeah. They're not the best to own, but they can definitely be fixed. So, like first year of anything.
Yeah. Early model of anything. Yeah. We see the same thing on the gas side with like the early direct injected LS motors, or LTs technically.
So, I'm going to feel dumb without the technical lingo behind what the valves are actually made of, but 11 model valves cracking, causing low compression, causing misfires. If you're lucky to catch it and hear it before it actually drops a piece of that valve and you end up with a clink clink.
And I think that's the most catastrophic failure of the Powerstrokes, period. And it just doesn't get spoken about a bunch. Everybody talks about, like we said, CP4 failures. People talk about turbo failures. Some of the smaller things with like CCV related stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, fuel system is expensive, but it's not as expensive as a long block. They'll talk about oil leaks. Once again, not as expensive. But people kind of miss that. We see it all the time. Guys going, all right, 6.7 Powerstroke's the one to get, and then they come in with a 200,000 mile 11 model, and we're like, oh no, you messed up.
Wow, you're lucky. I can't believe you made it this far.
Do you have anything that you think the 6.7 Powerstroke does better than others in terms of the long block? Like for instance, you know, there are a few differences between the LML Duramax and 6.7 Powerstroke. We think they are as equal as comparison as you're going to get out of any of the late model diesels. We can't really so much compare the Cummins to them just because it's different engine architecture. But with the 6.7 and the LML, they're both V8s. They're both common rail, both CP4 powered. One thing I want to note is that I think the 6.7 does better is valve train. Hydraulic lifter, I think they're quieter. I think they're a little more failure prone, but I love the way that they handle the lifter situation up to the valves, not using rocker bridges. I think that's something important to mention and stuff like that.
Yeah, sacrificing some potential reliability for the quietness and all that stuff. I mean, there's just nothing like these newer trucks when it comes to quiet, but still making horsepower. You don't have your 7.3 and 6.0 clanks, which is fun for a little bit, but not for every day. But yeah, if we wanted to concentrate year models, we start off 11, obviously 11, and potentially some of the early production 12s had the valve issues. 11 to 14 turbos obviously had some issues there. If you haven't heard about that, we've spoke about it some briefly, but basically the 11 to 14 turbo bearing failures, I guess, is what it boils down to, is the
overall reliability
gist of it. But yeah, everyone wants to swap to the 15 up style. They changed some things again in 2017 that just continued to better the product, but definitely solutions out there. So if you're 11 to 14 owner, when it comes to the valves, I mean, there's no replacement other than just different heads, different valves. And that's the only option there. There's not really a lot to discuss on that other than it's expensive, and when it happens, you got to fix it. But if we're going to talk about things that are upgrades for the...
How would you catch a potential failure of the valve before it gets bad enough that it's catastrophic? What are your warning signs?
Okay, so there's a few things you can keep an eye out from. Not that they're always going to show their face, but on these 11 models that have some valve issues, more of an exhaust pulse than you would normally hear. You can typically hear it out the pipe a little bit. That'll help you some.
A lot of time through the intake, we get that thump.
Yeah.
that odd thump. It's a very it's a weird thing to describe. You don't see it on a lot of other engine platforms. But at idle, yeah, you'll get that odd thump, and the closer you get to the airbox, the louder it is. And if you want to, you can always separate the airbox, and then when you just have open air out there, it's very loud. But it's not like a metal on metal thump. It's more like a hollow drum sound.
It's one of those like a little bit harder for an untrained ear to pick it up on a truck that you're not familiar with. But once you know your truck, if you hear something like that getting worse, that's a thing. Injector codes we'll see sometimes like at its maximum learning limit because that cylinder is starting to drop a little bit of compression. You're having some issues there, so that's a very good telltale to it.
And that's a very good example of, we talked about scanners and stuff and how they don't solve everything. Injector code on these trucks has nothing to do with the injector, but it's a great indicator.
So that's two things to really watch out for if you're in an 11 model that may be a tail sign, which is some exhaust or intake pulse. Feel like naturally we kind of hear it out both sides of it. I feel like the exhaust I normally hear first-ish, but that as well as just like we were speaking the choking. But
so
I'm just here thinking like, that's such a bad issue, but I just went through the same thing. It's when it drops and it's in your piston, it's a bad day, and there's not really much to say beyond that.
Right. What would you do with a 6.7 buying one? Or if you haven't bought it yet, what are you looking for? Where are you starting? Say you're going to buy a 6.7 or you just bought it. You want to make sure it's a good truck. What do you do? I mean, we have the big three, of course.
So, I mean, you want to talk about, which that stuff's so cheap. So if you're looking at a 6.7, just like any truck, you want to do your full inspection all the way around. Biggest things on these trucks is going to be, just seeing how it was maintained. Upper oil pan, is it leaking? Is it a bad fix? No. Mildly expensive? Yes.
Right. Yeah, 5 to 6.
Spoken on charge pipes a little before.
And the charge pipe, in the grand scheme of things, is as much as it is a pain when it does let go, because most of the time it happens with a trailer. For whatever reason, these things love to pop when somebody's either out of town, heading out of town, or on their way back. But they're not expensive. They're not critical. They're not catastrophic.
Yeah, and backing up, upper oil pans, I think you overshot that one a little bit. Yeah. Not that expensive unless you're doing a lot of other stuff with it. You're probably thinking like some of these that we typically do where we're adding like CCVs and disaster kits and all this other stuff. So don't freak out and think your upper pan is going to be a $5,000 job. If they take it to the shop and it's $5,000 for the upper pan alone, that's probably way out of the
we did the big 3-on-1 while doing an upper oil pan. That's probably what I was thinking of. Yeah.
But again, if we just hit it over the year, so 11 model, valves, obviously an issue, signs of it, either injector codes or I feel like we're jumping around. So I'll try to rein in kind of an order here. So 11s, if you're looking at an early model, again, exhaust pulsations, hard to hear with an untrained ear unless you're familiar with the truck. Moving into...
I feel like you also hear it at low RPM, higher loads. I feel like we had one that was starting to make some noise and you could hear it in overdrive.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a thud. I think it was more obvious there than it was initially with the hood shut and the truck just idling.
But that moving into, particular injector codes like max learning adjustment values and stuff like that, if they're out of range because of compression, obviously that's a sign that something is not correct, which anytime you're looking at a truck, you're always going to be worried about check engine light codes, anything like that, period.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that kind of covers the valves. We jump into 11, 14 turbos. So, yes, they're more susceptible to failure, but there's great upgrades. So, even Ford actually has a 15 update kit.
Yeah, if you buy one of their complete engine assemblies, I believe they come already basically set up like a 15 up. I believe we did one that was that way.
I don't remember because we've done so many that were particularly cabin chassis, which is a different turbo altogether as well. So that kind of throws me for a loop.
Yeah.
But Ford does offer a 15 up swap kit. A lot of your aftermarket companies offer a 15 up swap kit. Some of them even offer the piping and stuff to work with a 17 up charger, which is again just a little bit different.
Yep.
Good turbos. Great, similar technology that we've had in trucks for a long time. Ford kind of went out of their way on 11 to 14s to do a different charger. A lot of guys love the sound of them. You know, they're different. They're definitely a one-off
you come
truck.
off throttle and they make all the noises. It's kind of like the same with the early 6-liter turbos. You know, everybody loved the way they sound, but they got away from it, and there were reasons for that. I think something to mention with the 11 to 14 trucks, and I'll get your opinion on it as well. As awful as they look, if you're not familiar with the diesels, upgrading a turbo, I don't think it's that bad.
No.
I really don't. I think that's something within the realm of what would you say, like an intermediate level DIY guy, something, you know, somebody that's familiar being hands-on, but maybe not a diesel person. Do you think it's worth buying a 13, 14 model truck that's got the older charger and going to 15 up if the truck just meets your needs otherwise?
Yeah, as long as it's been well maintained and stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, we sell the parts, so you can do it yourself. It's just one of those jobs, if you're the type that gets frustrated and want to start throwing wrenches and stuff when something doesn't go your way, probably not the move. We've seen a lot of people ask on the forums and stuff, is it a cab removal job? It's not.
No,
it's nowhere close to it. And we're starting to see the trucks at this age too, where exhaust manifold bolts break on the back, causing some exhaust leak again while you're there doing the turbo. All that stuff's not that bad to do. Again, the heads are aluminum, so getting the studs out of the head is not that bad either, even once they're broke.
I think something to mention really quick, and this goes for all of your turbo diesels and really most of your turbo vehicles in general. When a manifold bolt breaks, it's no longer the little hiss noise at idle and the little clicking you hear going down the road. These things will squeal, and it sounds very weird if you're not familiar with it, just because of drive pressure. So, but yeah, it's a common thing. But you're right there. It's a hot V motor, so your manifolds are right there next to the turbo. If you're putting a turbo in one, you're 95% of the way there to the manifolds.
Yeah.
So
if you hadn't heard what he was saying with the hot V, so basically the 6.7 Powerstroke is reversed. Your exhaust is normally on the outside of your head, down near your frame rails. On these 6.7 Powerstrokes, it's actually inboard, where your intake manifold would normally sit. Kind of confusing because when you look at the top of these engines, if you're not familiar with them, your intake is still on the top, but your valve covers actually transfer all that air into the outside edges where your exhaust would normally be on a standard engine. So flows backwards. Air, even though it sits on top of the motor from the actual intake and stuff, airflow runs through the valve covers to the outside of the engine, comes through, pushes through the inside, and the manifolds are right there at the turbo, basically. You still have a short up pipe, so there's a few inch advantage. I'm not going to say it's that great versus the others, but I mean, it seems to be working for them.
I think any offset, you know, because people will talk about the direction of airflow and the volume and equate that to lag, I think it's not really worth mentioning. What you maybe lose with a hot V setup, you gain because it's got a water to air charger cooler on it. So the runs are so much shorter and stuff. So I don't think there's anything there. And I don't think you gain a lot of IATs with that sort of setup. I think overall it's still really solid one. The only thing that I think I don't like, and you can kind of give me your opinion on this, the only thing I don't like about the hot V setup is the gap where the coppers can fall in for the injectors. I think that's it.
Yeah, and that's a design error on Ford's part.
Yeah.
So
I think it would have been simple to fix too. I think if we just put, you know, casted a bore or a standoff that closes that off for the injectors.
Yeah, just like so some of your small gas motors, like your inlines and stuff, if you're familiar with the gas engine, like your coil packs would pass through. Some of your Hemis are like that.
All your little Hondas and stuff, they have the little metal, they come with valve cover gasket.
Yeah, so your coil would pass through the center of the valve cover down into your spark plug. So instead of spark plug dealing with the injector on a diesel, but basically the injector passes through the center of that valve cover. There's a little grommet there, but there's actually a gap between where your injector bottoms out in the head and that grommet on the valve cover. So if you're not careful when you're pulling those injectors out, that copper washer can fall down in there, get wedged in a valve spring, knock a valve spring, keep her off or something, and then it's a very bad day. So again, just like any truck, when we're talking, you know, high dollar trucks, high dollar engines, obviously whoever's working on it for you just needs to be extremely clean, keeping up with their parts, you know, making sure that they're not leaving spare parts like old coppers or anything like that in the engine, because if you go to fire one up and there's a copper gets wedged in a valve spring or something, you would hope because it's copper it bends, it doesn't cause something catastrophic, but it absolutely could.
At the best, you're still dealing with a lot of contamination that has to make its way through the pickup, through the pump, and then back to the filter to get caught, even if it doesn't do any, you know, damage as a whole while it's up top. But that just comes back, I really feel like you said, working clean, working organized. Anytime I've got the injectors out of something, or I'm resealing injectors, I'm always laying out my coppers, my old ones and my new ones, to make sure that everything that I pulled off is accounted for and everything that goes back on is on. It's very simple to just sit there and count out your O-rings and coppers and be like, okay, well, if I've got 1 here and I've got 8 here, then I did not put a copper on one of these injectors. So.
Yeah. So working around the top of the motor, we've covered the heads. We touched on the valves on the 11 to 14s. It's more to maintenance than anything. We've seen a few of these with some valve train issues. Not going to dig too far into that, because literally these trucks, just like anything, can have any issue. It's all maintenance and stuff. So we're going to stick to what's common and what you need to know. But we've covered the valves. We moved to a little bit of injectors there for a minute. Covered the turbo issues. Right. We'll stay on top of the motor for a minute, and we'll hit CCV real quick, and then we'll move to the high pressure pump. So crankcase vent, it's spoke about on the forums all the time. Right. So many different aftermarket options out there for it. The new 24 models have a baffled design straight from Ford that no longer has basically a way to clog up in there. So much better update. We've been selling a lot of those 24 model CCVs to go on the older trucks to retrofit them to fix that issue.
And they're priced great. I mean, they're not an expensive maintenance item or upgrade.
Still, I think sub 200 from Ford. So awesome. So speaking of the CCV, all your older trucks, like we've mentioned before, PCV system would just not be a PCV. It would just dump to the ground before your crankcase vent. But on these trucks, obviously it's recirculating. The filter media in there on that factory box clogs up, causes excess crankcase pressure, i.e. rear main leaks, oil pan leaks, upper oil pan leaks that are a pain to do, front cover leaks,
back pump, all the
vacuum pump, turbo base gasket. That's not going to be fun either. So all those things are something to watch for. So we've talked more about maintenance in the past, but maintain that CCV filter, make sure that thing's handled, get with either an aftermarket company, get one that's a serviceable design, the newer Ford design. Heck, I don't care if you use the one that was designed for your truck. If you change it every so many, 40, 50,000 miles, we've had that talk a lot.
The two big preferable options for me, honestly, right now, the number one's probably the new Ford design. Yeah. I think it's just priced right. They just fit well. OE O-rings always feel better. They have that nice firm, like interference fit that, they're going to seal. Secondary one that I don't think is a bad move is the SPE. It's a little more blingy for somebody that's trying to make the, underneath their hood look good. I do want to ask you about this and get your opinion on it. I know I've got mine. You talked about vent and atmosphere. Do you think that's worth doing on one of these trucks?
So these trucks, if you haven't heard us say it before, they're just very heavy breathers. Whatever Ford did in the design in this engine, it makes a lot of...
And that goes all the way back to the 6-liter. I mean, they're the same way.
Yeah, honestly. So Ford's naturally got some heavier breathing engines than some of the others when it comes to the Powerstroke lineup. That being said, when you do...
Let's clarify on heavy breathing. You're talking about expected blow-by.
Expected blow-by. Yeah. Basically expected blow-by. So, so when you pull the oil cap off these trucks, they're very steamy. You see a lot of oil vapor coming out.
Right.
Exactly. So a lot of guys are big on just delete everything. And, you pull your CCV off, and then you're going through a drive-through, and that crankcase vent is now vented to atmosphere with no kind of screen, no kind of baffle, no kind of recirculation. And all that vapor is just venting off in the air, and somebody at the drive-thru thinks your truck's on fire. You have people at the red light stopping you because they see smoke rolling out from under it, wondering what's on fire. So personal preference, good for gaskets and seals. Obviously, not having any pressure on the crankcase, absolutely. Good for the environment and good for the look of your truck rolling vapor out from under it and the smell. Nah, probably not so much.
So my opinion, with the Fords and... we're talking about, in particular, the 6.7 here, just round it back into the intake. As long as you're keeping up with the maintenance side of stuff, I don't think the off-put of that being recirculated is that big of a deal. Some guys do try to reroute them back into the exhaust and let the exhaust Venturi try to burn off some of that vapor. It doesn't really work. Not at idle. Not when you're driving through drive-thrus and stuff. They still haze. We've seen it firsthand. It looks like your truck's on fire. It stinks. The last thing I want to do personally is go buy a $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 truck, nice Lariat or King Ranch interior, and then it smelled like oil vapor.
You're choking
Yeah.
out the people at McDonald's.
Yeah, well, you're choking out yourself. It always makes it back into the cab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers the CCV, which bleeds into all your gaskets and stuff. We only have to hit upper oil pan, rear main, front main, all that stuff. That's all included with the CCV. You make too much pressure, gaskets blown out. It's just part of it. So maintain the CCV. The rest will follow suit. You can look into that a little bit when you're buying a truck. We're talking about everything 6.7 Powerstroke. When you're buying the truck, if it's super leaky, obviously hasn't been maintained, so you need to keep those factors.
And what's a good indicator for the age of the CCV on some of these trucks, especially the earlier one?
So it's good that you bring that up, especially your earlier trucks. I don't know what they're doing, especially on like these 24s now that the CCV is a little different. But on your earlier trucks with the big flat top CCV, there's the factory injector codes stuck on a sticker to the top of this CCV.
And when they're replaced, it's no longer there because you don't have a second sticker.
So it's very obvious if that's the OE filter or not. So that's something good to look at on the early ones. That in combination with how much oil is leaking out from under it covers the CCV. Moving forward to the most popular topic, because we're trying to hit all this stuff so quick. Man, I don't want to get into it too deep, but CP4 and DCRs and CPX pumps and all this other stuff. So what I'd really like to touch on, because I'm sure everyone's read it on the forum, and just to state our opinion, I'm sure we can unanimously say that we're probably DCR is pick number one.
Right.
Followed by like either a CPX or a disaster prevention kit, either the upgraded, like I said, CP4 that was the CPX by the other companies, or your disaster prevention kit, which is also a S&S thing, just like the DCR. Not getting too deep into that. What do we see with the disaster prevention kit that I guess really wouldn't matter what brand it was, that can still cause you a detrimental failure on these trucks?
You're talking about not being able to or monitor that contamination.
What can that disaster prevention kit not do to save this truck?
So with the exception of the Gen 2 SP, if we're talking about the same thing here, is you're not going to know that that pump is failing for a period of time. What's happening is all of that contaminated fuel, the glitter, as you see it on the internet, is making its way to that secondary or third filter. And there's no indication that that pump's laying over. What happens long term, and we've seen this a few times, these pumps eventually let go and lock down just like a motor, because they are essentially they look like a little V-twin. Yeah. And when they fail, it's a bad day. We're seeing more of the crank gears get spun. There's no key for those. When these things are locking down, they're spinning the crank gear off center, so you're no longer in time. But yeah, you don't know that that's happening because you're not clogging the injector returns with this glitter, so you're not getting your P0087s. Yeah. Which is your rail pressure below desired.
So to put that into terms, it's not just us getting super technical back and forth. We tell you, if you have a disaster prevention kit, incredible upgrade. We sell them all the time. We love them. We hear a lot of people say, oh, well, do I need to change that return filter on my disaster prevention kit? And everyone goes with the argument of, well, you got your lower filter and then your factory upper filter, so why would any dirty fuel ever get to it? And the real answer is dirty fuel should never make it to that return side filter. But we suggest you check it every time you do your fuel filters, because that is going to be the first place that metal ends up with the disaster kit. So your disaster kit prevents your injectors, your rails, your lines, all from collecting that glitter. Keeps it out of the expensive parts, but the metal will still come out of the pump. The pump can still fail. So what you want to do is consistently check that return side filter that's mounted on the firewall with like your S&S kit. Always look at it when you change your fuel filters with a flashlight. Look heavy. Get a filter wrench or a filter splitter. Cut it open, looking for the metal material, because we want to see that sign before the pump gets bad enough that it actually can lock down. Because again, the one thing a disaster prevention can't do is prevent that pump from actually locking down, spinning that crank gear, knocking the truck out of time, potentially whacking every valve in it, leading you to basically need an engine.
And that's something we've seen. That's not just some random internet horror story. That's something we put our hands on
multiple times.
Water does it too. I still don't fully understand how water does it. I've assumed it would freeze, but that's not the case. But anyways, so that's another huge catastrophic failure. In a sense, not having the disaster kit kind of makes it a little more obvious, but the same time, you're just kind of trading one huge bill for another.
So quickly, that things people don't think about once you have a disaster prevention kit, and the reason we are pro DCR and upgrades like that is you still need to maintain your disaster prevention kit.
Yep.
The pump can still come apart and spin your motor out of time.
Mm-hmm.
Is it common? Not necessarily, but we're seeing it happen. So when there is the opportunity to go to the DCR, that's the reason we like to lean that direction. And that just sets you up for the long run. SNS has got some good videos on it. We've felt it in person. The DCR spins over easy by hand, where the CV4 is a lot harder to spin, so that's less pressure on your gear set, all that kind of stuff. And then also water, disaster prevention kit can't keep water from passing through. So same thing, like we've said in the maintenance videos, keep track of your fuel filters, all that stuff. Just take care of your truck.
Yeah.
So
and keep good additives in it.
Yes.
For sure. I think that honestly, we spoke about it, and I'm not going to go down this trail. The number one easiest thing you can do to keep your truck running is to keep these good additives in it. There's a whole list of things regarding fuel quality, fuel's lubrication properties, and stuff like that that leads to these failures. And the easiest thing you can do to help keep these parts alive is to lubricate them, and you do that with an additive. So
yeah, I'd love to hit a few more things before we wrap up, but definitely on your subject to additives, that's huge because the CP4 is basically a camshaft in there.
Mm-hmm.
We all know a normal engine does not like to run with fuel in the crankcase, and that's all we're lubing these with is fuel in the crankcase. So that's why we believe in products like LX4 from Hot Shot and stuff like that, adding that lubricity to the fuel to help that fuel lube those metal-on-metal roller lifters parts is obviously essential.
It's amazing they make it as long as they do, in my opinion. If we were to stick diesel fuel in a regular motor, it wouldn't make it 100 miles, if that long.
So we hit valves, we hit some of that and what that has to do with valve train and heads. We hit the turbos, we hit the CCV, we hit the pumps or the pump swap options.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about a little bit of exhaust leaks when we were talking about that. We've talked about gaskets and seals. I believe we touched on the cold side pipes a little bit.
Right off the rip. Early on. And that's one, as much as I want to see everybody protect their investment, I think that's probably last on the list. It's very simple. It's
such a cheap fix.
It's a $300 or $250 fix that you can do in your driveway with 2 tools.
Yeah.
So that's about it.
I'm trying to think of the rest of stuff that it would be worth mentioning on these trucks. Carly suspension pushes the info more than anything, but almost every truck we see that's, one of these 250s, 350s, 4-wheel drive has like a leveling kit of some sort on it.
Right.
They look caster adjustment.
Yeah, caster adjustments. I mean, very important. I think ultimately everybody brings it to us for caster adjustments because of death wobble. I feel like that's when it finally gets bad enough.
Now they don't know that's what they need, but
they don't know that's what they need, but that is the symptom that they come in for. But caster shims make a huge difference. Yeah. I think that's more of a Dodge thing. We just don't see it as much on the Fords.
So Carly suspension pushes it, but if you have a level kit, the Carly kits, the higher end stuff comes with it, but that's just one thing worth mentioning. Anytime you go up in the truck, you're changing geometry, you're losing some caster. So being able to buy the shims from a company like Carly, we have a different source for them as well. I mean, there's multiple places we can get them, but
I think you can get them from a parts store.
Yeah, you just have to know what you're looking for and what the specs are. Yeah. But absolutely, you level your truck. If you don't know, call us, but get your caster shimmed back to factory or a little bit extra, like Carly suggests, just so you lose that potential death wobble, get the drive feel back in the truck like it should be. And I'm sure there's some
something
stuff
we were complaining about with those trucks. When they're leveled like that, you get that almost no feedback feel. And I think getting the caster in them really brings that back to where you can actually feel the road.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think if there's anything else super common on these trucks. I know we're missing something. Comments are in below. Hey, you forgot. But just trying to hit what people would really want to see. Emissions side, def heaters, which is not the end of the world. So with your emission side of things, NOx sensors, def injectors, def pumps,
EGR is the main thing I think we see.
Yeah, I'll say all that stuff is common on the other trucks, but these not as much.
But that's why it's our favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, really, honestly, that's why bumper to bumper, when someone asks about a truck, we refer to them by the motor. I'll say that's a 6.7 Cummins truck or a 6.7 Powerstroke truck or a 5, whatever. But we're talking about the whole truck. And so I think bumper to bumper, even though we do have some things that we have to work our way around with on the motor and some certain year models that are better or worse, that's why I think we prefer the 6.7 the best, because outside of those things that are all solvable problems, we've got solutions for every one of these. Bumper to bumper, they're great.
Yeah. It's a great truck. It really is. So if you're looking for one, we like them. We're fans of them.
Yeah, they're my favorite.
They all have their fixes, but that really wraps up most of the 6.7 stuff. There's all little things around that, again, any truck can have. But if you got any questions or any further stuff, put it in the comments, call us, ask us. We'll give you every bit of info we can, and we can always do a full episode on digging into CP4s themselves and how they wear out. Yeah. That's a whole subject.
Yeah. Not all CP4s fail by glitter. I'm just here to tell you that now. And
we'll leave that into a whole episode. We will break down a CP4 for you. We'll show you what fails in them, not only just the glitter bombs, but some other issues.
And that'll educate you more on how the disaster prevention kits actually function.
Yeah. So. We'll bleed into that because I see it on the forums all the time. Hey, I don't have any glitter on my FCA, but my truck won't start. There's a million things that can lead to it, but we can help you out on the CP4 side of stuff. So
cool.
That kind of wraps up the Powerstroke. Again, if you got any questions, comments, concerns, throw them down there. We'll check it out. We'll respond to it, and then we'll kind of move forward and pick another truck another week and tell you about it.
That'll work. Y'all have a good one.